Yeah. Mhm.
So sorry.
Okay, let's
Hi, everyone.
Hello, Elaine.
Good morning, Renee. How are you? Good afternoon, whatever it is. It's Monday.
Yes, it is.
And I feel like Miss Marianne in Romper Room. And I see Bill, and I see May, and I see Renee.
You see Mike,
I do see Mike.
but
And
nobody has
Oh, I got
pictures
it.
on.
Mo's on here.
I taught a,
How do I
I
increase?
taught a Ignite class this morning.
Uh-huh.
Three people had their video on, 12 didn't. Feel like you're talking to
You should have had a contest.
what?
I don't know. You do something that's visual. It requires them to respond to you visually,
But then I'd have to give them something.
besides your time and expertise. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. And it was, I have to say, it was my two favorite subjects. It was negotiating a contract and what was the other one? It was all about that. My favorite topic. By the way, I told Chuck that he needs to be on here, so he should be getting on.
You want water or
He
something?
was just here.
Any,
He
He-
mentioned that and he said nobody told him about this.
Well, he literally swooped in, sprinkled some candy, and then wanted me to take his picture so he could update his profile because his hair is brown in his profile and white in real life.
I like it. I like it.
I think
I
it's
like
great.
it. I do too.
Fabulous. So we took new pictures and then I emailed him pictures. So we'll see which one he uses. I didn't tweak them, so.
Yeah, well, Ramona's back in town, so he's gonna be good. Okay now.
Yeah, it sounded like she was not quite back yet.
Yeah, she just landed. She just texted me that she was home, so
Oh, good.
yeah.
I can hear people. Yeah. Very good. Okay. You grab Chelsea? She's coming. in a minute.
So Mike, are you in Campbell?
Yeah, I'm in Campbell right now. I have some technology issues that I'm working through.
Oh,
And
I
I'm
was
waiting
just
for
gonna tell
Chelsea
you,
to show her face so she could help me.
oh, I was just gonna tell you that it
I
looked
think
like
she's
you had a
coming right
great
now. Hey,
setup.
Chelsea. I need to increase volume. I need to increase volume. I can't hear anybody.
Oh, okay. Well, everyone's on mute. Oh, Elaine, can you say something?
Hi, Chelsea.
Hi? No? Okay.
Can you hear me?
Okay,
Chelsea?
there we go.
No, that's not.
Yeah, we want to turn this down and turn this up.
Okay.
Yeah. Elaine, say
Yes?
something?
You want me to say
Okay.
something? Hi, Chelsea.
Hi, we've got you. We can hear you now.
And how about, can you guys hear me okay?
I can. I have my volume all the way up though.
Yeah, turn it up.
I actually turned my hearing aids on.
Woo!
Okay,
All right.
all right.
Dorothy's getting hearing aids.
Nice.
I don't know. It might not be.
So let's
You can't be talking behind her back anymore.
Thank you. We're getting more toys dropped off. Yes. Can we take your picture?
So you
Can
should
we-
be able
can
to
we-
scroll.
Can we not share right this second?
Okay. Stop share. Sorry. Share.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Mhm.
Can I call you in 2
Yeah.
minutes?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yeah.
don't go too far away.
Be right here.
All right.
Oh,
How's everyone doing?
good.
Good.
Good,
How are
okay.
you?
Good. And you guys can hear me okay?
Yes.
I got, are we at 1 o'clock? Yes, we are.
Yes.
All right. All right, guys, we're gonna get started. What I want to talk about are the new revisions and the new forms that are coming in. Tomorrow, they'll be available in zip forms. But before I do that, I would like to have Drew speak on not the new forms that we're having in zip forms and CAR, but there's some new forms that are lender forms that you guys need to be aware of regarding specifically the condos. So Drew, come on up here. And this is Drew from O2 Mortgage, and he's going to talk about these new
Hey,
things
guys.
that are popping up.
Excellent. Yeah, so hi there. A big thing that we are kind of working through on the lending industry in general have to do with condos and specifically deferred maintenance. Has anybody had any kind of experience with deferred maintenance in those forms?
What
Possibly.
deferred maintenance means? Let's start with that.
Great question. Yeah. Okay. So there's a couple of large buildings, condo buildings on the East Coast that unfortunately had a lot of maintenance issues. They were not upkept, and some people died because these buildings collapsed. And because of that, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, these very, very large government-sponsored entities that are about 95% of the lending industry, have produced some new documents that all lenders are essentially required to obtain from the HOA association. And it has to do with deferred maintenance. So, if they were supposed to replace, the stairs and they haven't, if there's, balcony issues or, structural issues, this is what this document is really asking about. And what we've found is anytime these forms change, associations don't really like filling these things out and answering these questions. So there's some pushback. So my job today is just to tell you guys what it's about, how you want to handle it, and then if you run into any issues, how to go about it. So the big thing is, I guess what I'd tell you first off is if there's ever any special assessment, that's definitely something that you want to raise your hand and say, okay, why is there a special assessment? Right? Because you have your standard monthly HOA dues, and that's typical for all HOAs. If you have a special assessment, it means that they need more money. Why do they need more money? A lot of times it has to do with the fact that there's some sort of large repair that needs to be done, and so they're getting more money from the owners. That's likely to do with deferred maintenance, or it could be at least. So definitely that's something you'd want to investigate. If there is deferred maintenance, that's not necessarily a deal killer, but it is something that needs to be resolved. And again, deferred maintenance, it has to do with this, a lot of times the structural issues of the property itself. Okay. So I've got in my hands a what's called a condo questionnaire. You guys can see that. These are pretty standard. It used to be 1 page. It's now 4 pages. And there's 1 page that's completely focusing on deferred maintenance. So we send this every day when we get, or every time we get in the contract, we send this form to the association. The association fills it out and sends it back. And this last page is all deferred maintenance. So there's questions like, is the HOA aware of any deficiencies related to safety, soundness, structure, integrity, right? You guys don't need to know the ins and outs of this. You need to be aware that if there's any kind of issues with the structure of the property, any health and safety issues, that's going to be a lending problem that needs to get resolved. So are there ways around it? Well, one, even if you're a listing agent, talk with me. Hey, Drew, I have a condo that I'm going to list. I can look up the association and see if it's already been called out as having deferred maintenance. There are a lot of condo associations that have already been called out. And that means that the Fannie Mae's and the Freddie Mac's of the world, so 95% of the loans out there, cannot lend on these associations until those repairs have been done. Okay, so that's a big thing to be aware of. So you know, as you're listing your properties. On the buy side, again, same thing. You can reach out to me and say, hey, my buyer would like to buy 123 Anywhere Street. Can you review the association to make sure it's not on the naughty list? It's not on the deferred maintenance list. Okay, so that's the first thing. Second thing, some HOAs are being told by their legal counsel to not fill out these forms because they feel deferred maintenance is subjective. Who are they to say it's deferred maintenance and not something else? So there has been a lot of pushback. Usually for the first year or two, there's some pushback and then the industry figures out what they're willing to do and what they're not. But if there is pushback, there's two ways we can go about it. One, my parent company has put together a database of any association that we have approved in the last 12 months. So if somebody is unwilling to fill out this HOA document for us, but we approve them January of this year, we don't need to go back and ask for these deferred maintenance documents, and we can just move forward with that approval on file back in January. Okay, so that can help a lot. One, speed things up, especially if there's any kind of pushback from the association. The other thing is, if there is deferred maintenance, there is a workaround that many people don't know. It's a lot of work on my side, but we can go back and get 12 months of meeting minutes. We can get reserve study. We can get a bunch of other things if they are truly unwilling to work with us. And unfortunately, I have 2 deals in contract right now that both associations are unwilling to fill this out. And again, this isn't something that just my company wants. It's everybody who does a Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac loan. So really anything at the $726,000 loan amount and below. And then in many high cost areas, like pretty much everyone on this call, I imagine, up to the $1 million and above loan amount, you're looking at these Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac loans, which again, you're looking at condos or townhouses, many loan amounts are going to be in that price range. So I know it's a lot of information. What you need to know is there's something called deferred maintenance that a lot of lenders are going to be asking questions on. If you see a special assessment, that should raise your spider senses and be aware that you might need to dig a little bit further. And if you have any inkling of possibility of deferred maintenance, or you want to just double check with me, it's free. And that's why I'm here.
Do you have your insurance
Cool.
claim?
Yep.
Thanks, Drew.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Bottom line, work with a professional, guys. I don't need to tell you that. You should know that already. But anyway, let's move on with what I want to talk about today, and that's revisions and new forms that are going to be released tomorrow. Basically, let's just get down to it. Chelsea, can you do share screen? There's not as many forms as you think because, for example, on the RPA, the purchase agreement, there's 6 other purchase agreements that are also going to be affected. So there might be, the number might say 8 different revisions for one specific form. Okay, let's get into a new form that this is an advisory, and it's the non-contingent offer advisory. Basically, we've been saying this to our buyers, but it's right now in writing specifically for a form. It's basically, while making contingency-free offer might help you, Mr. Buyer, get the property, there are risks involved, and we don't recommend it. So we believe that you should get your inspections, you should get contingencies and things like that. But you know how the market was at the beginning of the year or in last year, is that everyone that didn't write an offer with a contingency was basically put in a second position. So it's not as bad now, but this is a great form. It should have been done a couple of years ago. But this will be the one new release tomorrow. And I want you guys using this, especially if there's a no contingency offer. Second form is a solar advisory and questionnaire. And what I love about this form is that it's a form that's an advisory and also added information provided by the seller regarding solar systems. So there's a lot of information in here, taking the burden off of us as agents and putting it back on the sellers as well as the buyers to do investigations. So here's the advisory on page 1, and on page 2, there's explanations of from the seller. It's actually a great page that puts all the information and questions there for the seller to complete and make this part of your disclosure process if you have a home with a solar system. Okay. And you guys, we have these right now that we could send out today, but again, they'll be on zip forms tomorrow, so you'll be able to see them. Any questions on the first 2 forms? So we just covered
Question.
two new forms.
I have
Yeah.
a question, Mike. It's Tatiana. So let's say if we do a non-contingent offer, is this form will be automatically filled as the other one,
No.
or we need to
No,
fill it out
just-
separately?
I'm not aware of it being automatically printed out for you. I just would just make sure you include it. And if I'm wrong, I'll be happy.
Thank you.
Okay. Sure. Okay, let's talk about the RPA. Now this is a purchase agreement. There's other purchase agreements. All the purchase agreements that are going to be notice of default purchase agreement, the other purchase agreements that are out there. There's, I think, a total of 7 of them are all going to be changed in the same way. And the first change is dealing in E1 regarding the points. And the default on the purchase agreement today says that the default is going to be 0 points. Well, they made the change reflective tomorrow to fill in what the points are going to be. So it's not going to be a 0 anymore as a default. It's going to be the buyer to pay up to blank, and it'll be actually a number that you put in there. Okay, so this is important for the lender, for your loan, for things like that. So that's the first point. That's a pun intended there. This will be for both the first deed of trust, as well as it's in there for E2, which is a second or the additional financing. So pretty simple, but a subtle change. That 0 is not a default anymore on that. Okay. The next thing, and we'll get into this towards the end of our call, is the 6. There's 6 buyer representation forms that we're going to be talking about, and this talks about G3 is an optional form. If you check the box, then it's included. But if you don't check the box, then you could ignore it. And this is where this would be used where there is no compensation from the seller. So if you see on the MLS, you see that the commission that's going to be paid to the buyer's agent is $1 or 0. Now fortunately, we don't see that very often at all, but this would be something that we would get into the next step to make sure that we would get compensation. And it would be compensation from the seller or the seller's agent. So again, this is included in here, also included with the new form that we'll talk about, and it is to be used when there's no compensation being offered from the seller or the seller's agent. Okay, so it's a total optional form that you see. That's why you see the box, and I think the plan from the forms committee is someday, somehow, we're going to start seeing compensation from the from the, to the buyer's agent be reduced.
Mike,
And
would
there's,
does this supersede the forms we would currently use, or single party compensation forms or any of that?
well, single party compensation form would be you getting a kind of a listing. It'd be on you as the agent. There's no single party compensation agreement wouldn't involve a listing agent. It'd be direct from the seller paying commission. Here, this would be used where there's a property that could be listed with the seller's agent and dealing with compensation. So before, we always use just the CBC, which is what the seller's agent is going to be paying us on this transaction. We're talking,
Does this supersede the CBC then?
this will,
CBC?
well, it's a little different because we're dealing with the sellers could be paying us, not the seller's agent. We're in a
Gotcha.
whole different area right now, where in the past, we never had to worry about the seller paying us. We always dealt with the seller's agent paying us. Here it's different. And the mindset is what the seller is going to be paying us.
Okay.
Did I answer the question?
Yes.
We'll get into it. We'll get into it towards the end of our hour, as well as we're going to have many more classes regarding strategies and regarding the forms of this as well. That is, I could just touch on here, but we'll be talking more in depth as this becomes more prevalent. Okay. No real issue here after delivery, 5 days or after delivery. That's nothing here. M3, which is the dealing with a tenant, what used to be regarding the unit being occupied by a tenant, and we would need what's called the TOPA. They've opened it up a little bit more because, you know, sometimes we don't have a problem with the tenant per se, but we might have a problem that someone's occupying the property, not as a tenant, but how about the son or daughter of the owner? So they elaborated this, and they're saying that anyone that is in the property besides the seller, you need to have a TOPA. And we've experienced this problem before, where the seller has their family member in the property, and when it comes time to get out, the seller's moving out, but the family member is not, and we never really addressed it in the car contract. Well, now we have to address it. Anybody that is not the registered owner of the property, we have to treat as a tenant in terms of the TOPA. So if you make an offer and you make the deal with the seller, we are now putting in the additional terms that the burden's on the seller to disclose to the buyer if there's someone occupying the property, not just tenants, but whoever, that's not themselves. So anyway, this kind of expands it, protects the buyer a little bit better, and gets kind of the details out as to actually who is the occupants of the property. Any questions on that? I think it's a pretty simple and for the benefit of the buyer. They changed up the home warranty plan. They reinserted what extras are going to be included in the home warranty plan. If you see by next to 10Z, the home warranty plan chosen by buyer coverage includes, but is not limited to, Okay. The other thing that they changed is if the seller is paying anything regarding any of the home warranty plan, there's a cost not to exceed. So if it's the seller is paying for it, there's a cost not to exceed, but they added that if there's both paying for it, the seller's cost shall not exceed. And that's just more defined role of the cost to the seller on that. They added a mixed-use purchase addendum. We're not going to go over that today. But the mixed use means that kind of like a retail on the bottom, units up top. That would be a mixed use. One example of mixed use. They added also the, we never addressed what happens, what's the buyer's liability if they never put the initial deposit in? And if they leave, they breach the contract and never put the deposit. So it's starting to be dealt with in this. So they also included the retention of deposit. And basically saying that if buyer fails to deliver deposit, there's some possible liability and remedies in the option for the seller in that. And again, this is in every single purchase agreement that we're dealing with on this. We already covered, this is where anybody but the actual sellers living in the property. And this should be a lot of repeat stuff in here. Little wordsmithing. They added pool heaters as part of included in the sale. They also added, which was pretty funny, the curtains and rods. I guess there's been some experiences where the sellers are required to leave the curtains, so they take the curtains off the rods, put the curtains on the floor, and take the rods with them. I've never heard of it, but I guess it's happened before. The other thing they added was when a seller has some internet type devices or electronic devices, they have to now delist any devices from their personal accounts and make it easier for the buyer to use their own, in terms of a thermostat that's electronic, that type of stuff. So the other thing that they've added is they've added tests. So not just inspections and reports. Now we included tests as that, but now they spelled it out even more clearly. So tests are considered reports and inspections as well. Covered home warranty. Okay, covered solar systems. Added 12B2, and what this verbiage is basically for is that they put this verbiage in so that people that they wanted to delineate the difference between investigations and other contingencies. So they want to make sure it's not all lumped together. So they wanted to make sure that that a buyer is removing the specific contingencies of the contract, not just it's a blanket contingency. So there's different contingencies and separate from sometimes just investigation of the property. So that's what they did there. The only other thing that they did, well, this is again, this buyer broker and compensation, which we'll go over several of the forms at the end about being compensated or a buyer's agent being compensated on there. One of the things that you'll see in a whole bunch of these buyer forms of compensation, buyer's agent, is now that it's clear cut, it's a fiduciary duty for the buyer's agent and ethical is to tell the buyer what we're getting paid. And it started off, you saw with the MLS that now the buyer compensation is now in the MLS. So it's in all these forms that we are to tell the buyer what we're getting paid and how we're going to be responsible and do it. And I have my ideas on that. Okay. They included regarding paragraph 23 assignment, they included nomination. Now, nomination and assignment are two different things in the legal definition. However, that CAR put both together. And so if it is an assignment or if it is a nomination of the purchase contract to someone else, it's going to be treated together. So the nomination will be just treated just like an assignment. And the seller cannot unreasonably withhold the assignment. They need to approve it or approve the nomination, but they only 17 days to do it. And that whether it's a nomination or the assignment, whoever is being assigned or nominated has to adhere to the contract the way it is. So this paragraph 23, adding nomination doesn't change anything except allows a buyer to nominate someone instead of assignment. But if they nominate, they need to carry through with the rules of the assignment. And I'm not going to get into any more of that. Just they added the nomination. It doesn't change anything except that it allows people to nominate instead of assign, but it still has to go with the rules and the laws of the assignment. Okay. They added the definition about counting days and what legal holidays are. They added what it's now, it wasn't clearly defined what the holiday was, and now they're defining it as a legal holiday, a holiday or optional bank holiday under the code, or it could be under a government holiday, but now it expands on what a bank holiday may be as part of as a legal holiday. So I don't think anything's really changed on that. It just put it clearly defines it better. And I would still go to your favorite escrow company and get the legal holidays of right now of 2023 and just put them in your calendar. I'm going to skip paragraph arbitration paragraph C, and all the legal junkies could have a field day over that. I don't know what the hell it means. So the last thing on the contract is for us as agents to complete, and you designated electronic delivery address. Now you have your email, your address, you check your text and phone, and you put everything that you want to put down. And the importance of this is making sure that what is the definition of delivery? It's when the completed contract goes to these addresses. So it's pretty simple. It's both the seller's agent and the buyer's agent and the firm. And that takes care of the RPA and the 6 other purchase agreements that are also being released tomorrow. Pretty minor stuff, but some subtleties that you need to know about. Okay, let's talk about the buyer counteroffer. And also, question? Someone have a question on this?
I was
Okay.
going to ask about, you were talking about internet devices for connection. Are
Yeah.
they personal property or just like a water heater?
I don't know what your question is, but let me try to assume that you're talking about personal property that is being used in the electronic delivery of certain service, such as a a thermostat or something like that, where you use an iPad?
Do they count the internet devices or a lot of people, they have like
No,
big electronic devices, like they have like servers in their home. They are personal property. They go with the seller, right?
Yes.
Okay, and
Yeah.
that's what we were talking about with the RPA.
Yeah, what I was talking about is that for my house, I use my iPad and I operate a whole bunch of different things out of my house. It could be the heater, the air conditioner, it could be lights, it could be all that. I still take my iPad with me, but I help the buyer disconnect me, and then they are free to connect theirs. But I take my iPad with me. Did I answer your question?
So those electronic internet connection devices like Google has or other companies has, they are personal property. They don't stay with property.
I don't know what devices specifically you're talking about, but I agree with you. Where do I sign? Okay, let's move on to counter offers. So the first one we'll talk about is a buyer counter offer. Now, there was a lot of confusion at the car level with other brokers and agents talking about this, and it's really, really simple. In the counter offer where they're talking about appraisal, and there's a contingency on the appraisal in the RPA. For example, I'm going to give you the scenario first, and then I'm going to back it into how this is explained in the counter offer. Let's take a property is $1 million sales price, and the buyer says, I want a contingency not on the $1 million, but on a number, say $980,000. The house is to appraise at $980,000. So basically, it's a $20,000 gap between what the purchase price is and what they need for an appraisal. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of other counter offers about this. And the counter offer price is at 1.1, and they agree to 1.1. The appraisal gap that was originally at 980 now has been changed, and it's reflective in the dollar amount between what the purchase price is and what the contingency is. So my reference to you was at $1 million sales price, but the appraisal has to be at 980 is $20,000. That's the gap. So if everything else gets addressed in the counter offer and there's no mention of any different appraisal contingency, the new appraisal has to be $20,000 less than the sales price that's agreed upon. So that gap of $20,000 is continued on to the final purchase price. So my original scenario was $1 million offer, a 980 appraisal contingency, and the counter offer is at $1.1 million. The appraisal contingency is now at $1.080 million. Do you guys get that? 20,000. The gap of the dollar difference moves on with the final sales price, not any percentage. So it's just strictly the dollar amount. That is what this contingency is talking. That is what this counter offer is talking about regarding appraisal gaps. It's dealing with the gap of the dollar amount between what the contingency of the appraisal is versus the sales price, and that continues on. I hope I explained it okay and not very as confusing as what it was in the CAR seminar. I can change it to the appraisal needs to be at 1.9. The sales price offer was at 2 million. It's $100,000 gap. You negotiate a final sales price of 2.5. That means the appraisal has to be at least 2.4. 100, it's the gap, the dollar amount, not the percentage, okay? And that will continue. Now, if there's no appraisal contingency, there's no gap. Or if the appraisal contingency is at sales price, there's no gap. This is only for a buyer that's putting in a appraisal contingency different than the sales price. You get that? You guys get that?
Yes.
Okay, all right. I'm telling you that it was confusing to a lot of people on the seminar. It wasn't confusing to me, but I was starting to get confused with all the other confusion there. Is that am I looking at it differently than what it really is? But it's really simple. It's just if there's a gap in the appraisal between the contingency of the appraisal versus the purchase price, that transfers if there's a negotiated price that's different. Okay? If no one has any issues, I'll move on. But if someone has some questions, it's totally okay. There was literally the people on there, it was 10% of the people kept on asking the same questions. Okay, is there anybody that wants me to go over this one more time? Or are we okay?
Mike, I'm sorry, I am a little bit confused. So if if the appraisal gap is a price, not saying 20,000, but it's like, 900,000, it's going to automatically adjust the difference, right? The delta. We don't have to go back and counter that the amount is an appraisal price versus a gap price.
Well, let's go on this. The gap price is in your offer. You said that it didn't have to appraise at the purchase price, it had to appraise at another price. Okay, if you don't have that difference between, if you have the contingency at a lower amount, there's a difference between the lower amount and the purchase price. That's the gap. So if that gap in your scenario is $900,000, you make an offer of 2 million and the property needs to appraise at 1.1 and you settle at 2.5, that appraisal needs to be at 1.6 because it's $900,000 difference between the what it needs to appraise at versus what the purchase price is. So that gap, whatever that gap is, that dollar amount would continue whatever the final purchase agreement is.
Okay, I'll read the gap. I think I understand it. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Anybody else? Okay, so that was the C. What B is that down payment and loan amounts will be adjusted in the same proportion as to the original offer, but the deposits will stay the same. I think that's what we have right now. And the seller credit shall stay the same as the original offer. So the only thing, if you're changing the price, is that the sales price will be different, the down payment and the loan amounts will be adjusted to reflect. If I'm going in with an 80% loan, that new loan will be at 80% of the final negotiated purchase price. Okay, let's move on. And that's in all three of the counter offers.
LTS.
Okay. Yeah, who's that? Okay, I thought there was a question there. All right, so we have a extension of time form, and that was changed now to make it look like an amendment. And with an amendment, there's always a time period. Remember we talked about it earlier when we had the addendum, the regular addendum, and then a few years ago they added an amendment, and it was the same as an addendum, except it had an expiration date, much like a counteroffer. And because we didn't want to have addendums that were floating out there that we didn't know whether the other party agreed to it or not. So the amendment was so that there would be an ending point that, hey, if I'm a buyer, hey, Mr. Seller, I wanted to make an amendment that I want to do this. And you have 3 days to sign this, or this amendment is not going to be around. So the same thing with the extension of time. It's now in the form of an amendment, and bottom line is we know whether this deal is going to be agreed upon with the new terms within a certain amount of days. That's all the amendment is. And I recommend amendments over addendums quite a bit. I'd like to have that time element have an end date so that the other party knows whether we have an agreement of meeting of the minds, no matter what it is, whether it's for time, whether it's for new terms, whether it's for whatever. Okay, but this strictly is for extending timelines. Questions?
I have a question. So this is the timeline that can apply to close of escrow, or if there is a tenant in possession, or if you give them rent back or whatever, right?
Well, it's for any time. It's for any time at all. So you
Okay.
got the escrow, you got extension of contingencies, contingency removals, any other extensions that we need to do, or additional terms. Yeah, it's for any timeline there is.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
So I don't know differences between addendums and amendments, but I guess this is not a good time to talk about that.
It's a great time to talk about it.
Okay,
What's your
great.
question?
My question is, I have been writing time of extension addendum many times in like last year. Honestly, I never heard about amendment, so I really have
Well,
no idea.
this is new.
Amendment is
amendment is
brand
new.
new. Oh, brand
No,
new.
the,
Oh,
the,
okay.
no,
Okay,
no, no.
great.
Let me stop. So hold on a second. The
Hmm.
extension of time amendment is new. We've always had amendments, well, not always, but the last few years, and we always had extension of time. But we never had it where the extension of time has a time frame now to get a response that it's an agreement or not. That's the amendment. So now when you do an extension of time, just like you did before, now you use the amendment because we want a response from the opposing party to make sure that we have an agreement on the extension of the time. And that's like any amendment at all. It's to make sure that we have a meeting of the minds, and not the addendum just floating out there forever without a signed agreement by both parties.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Mike,
Sure.
do we need to follow up an amendment with an addendum, or is the amendment still okay for going to escrow and lenders?
Amendment is fine. It's a meeting of the minds of both parties, and that can go right to the title and escrow. And I'll speak on behalf of Drew, but that should be fine for a lender as well. Okay,
So I have a
So here's
question
a
for the, sorry. So for the lender, you say, let's say if my buyer is changing their loan amount, let's say from 30 years fixed to 15 jumbo, whatever. So that also will be the case to write this extension of timeline. Is that
well,
right?
no, the extension of timeline, no one cares about the timeline unless you can't meet it. So if you're changing the loan, yeah, if you're changing the close of escrow, you need to do the extension of the time frame. But if you don't need to change, if you still can work within the timelines, you don't need the extension of time.
Well, and if you're changing your loan term, you don't need a loan.
No, it just
Okay.
makes sure that you close the deal. So the seller doesn't care if you change the terms of the loan, but you better perform because your loan contingency only reflects what was in the contract, not what you're trying to get. Okay? I mean, kind of veering off a little bit from the subject, but it's important to be able to know what you can do or not do without ramifications. Chelsea, can you lower the heat a little bit? It's too hot. It's too hot. I walked into the room and it was like 45 degrees and I'm getting a look now because it's like 80 and it's just too hot. Let's talk about the cancellation of contract and what this looks like now. So you guys still we have two things in a cancellation of contract. We have the cancellation in the top half of the form, and the bottom half is what we're doing with the deposit and the cancellation of escrow. So this here is broken up into two paragraphs. The first paragraph is the cancellation of the contract. And that is where either the buyer or the seller is canceling the contract. If you look at paragraph B, that is mutual cancellation of the contract. So, seller or buyer can sign the cancellation. So there's different options there. Paragraph 1 is as permitted by good faith of the agreement. So there's because of, you know, condition of the property or whatever you want to put down, you know, paragraph might be 14, the condition of the property. I don't know, whatever you guys want to do is fine. Paragraph 2 is that usually the buyer doesn't remove the contingency. So that's the cancellation after the given notice to perform and the party doesn't act. Not just the buyer failed, but also paragraph 3 could be the seller failed. So nothing's changed here. It's the same stuff. Paragraph 4 is the party didn't close escrow after being given a demand to close escrow, and that's why the contract's canceled. Or 5, any other reason you come up with. So proposed mutual cancellation would be where both parties are canceling the contract. And the important thing is if one changes his mind, they could revoke the cancellation on their part. But bottom line is paragraph 1 is for one of the parties to cancel. Paragraph B, 1A is where one party cancels. Part 1B is where both cancel. Now, you can cancel the escrow, but you have to deal with the deposit. And these give the options where you know, the full deposit in paragraph 2C. Paragraph 2C2 is the release of the buyer's deposit to the seller. And so you got 1, the seller releasing to the buyer, 2, the buyer's releasing to the seller, and 3, releasing a certain amount to the seller. 4, there's no deposit in escrow. And there's, you know what, guys, this might be a revision that there's a brand new revision that I did not put up here. I'm gonna have to email it to you guys or look it up. It deals with that if there's no deposit in escrow, there still could be liability on that. But unless I got it reversed where they took it out and this is the final one, there's one or the other. But there's basically there's now paragraph 4 where the no deposits in escrow and there's no money that needs to be released. However, there's still liability on a part of the buyer if there's no deposit in there. And then D is giving up some of the money, but the sellers or the buyers, whoever, can still, they're canceling the escrow, but they still might have a legal, they're not giving up their legal right to pursue. And that's in there too with the reservation of rights. Okay, so it splits it up a little bit more in terms of the cancellation as to one party buyer or seller cancels. And then what to do with the deposit. There's three things that need to happen. Cancel the contract, deposit where that's going, and canceling the escrow. And this one page handles all three. Okay. This is a real simple one. The change on this one is there used to be, they combined on page 2, the advisory or the addendum into paragraph 11. So it used to be 2 pages that are now on 1 page, and they have both of them together. So the mobile home purchase addendum and advisory are on one document. And there's not, I mean, it's almost verbatim, this stuff that was in the other form. So we combined 2 forms into one. And again, it's only for mobile home purchases. This is simple, it's condensed version, still means the same thing, but the Privacy Act is now a shorter form, and they cleaned it up a little bit with legal verbiage and all that, but it's the same thing. It doesn't apply to us because we're too small of a company. But it's the same thing, only better worded and condensed. The last bit is probably going to be taking the most time, but it's 6 different forms or 5 different forms we're going to go over regarding buyer representation and broker compensation agreement. This all started with the DOJ filing the lawsuit against the 5 biggest real estate companies in America, as well as the NAR. And as a result of that, and where we're going right now, which is going to take years, it's starting to happen with the disclosure on the MLS of what the buyer's agent is going to be compensated in commission. It needs to be disclosed to the buyer. And the theory of the lawsuit is that that it's built into the purchase agreement, these buyer commissions, and buyers have a right to know what the buyer's agent, even though they're supposedly not paying for it, they think they are paying for it because it's built into the purchase agreement. So that's why you see right now in MLS listings, what even on the not the full activity report, full MLS, but even the buyer's report now has the compensation to the buyer's agent. You see it on Zillow, and you see it on all the websites. So that's kind of the trigger, and the feeling from a lot of the professionals, both NAR as well as other people, is that as now that the commissions are quote unquote disclosed to the buyers, there may be some pushback on a part of buyers wanting that commission or wanting part of that commission or whatever. That's why the talk about having a buyer broker agreement is viewed by many people as that will be the standard practice that we'll be using, just like we have a listing agreement detailing compensation, that the buyer broker agreement will have the same. That's why CAR decided to expand on the changes of the buyer broker agreement, and we'll get to that. Basically, when we go through this, it's the condensing the 3 buyer broker agreements that we had into one buyer broker agreement with some different options that could apply to accommodate all 3 of what we had in the past. So let's go through this. And again, this is not a revision. This is a brand new form. So who's the buyer? That gets filled into the first line. Who's the broker? This is where you put your brokerage company. And by the way, please put the full name in here as to what the company is. I was in a deposition on Friday, and we're fighting for compensation. And in the listing agreement, it had Keller Williams Realty. Didn't have Keller Williams Realty, whatever you are, whether it's Gateway, Silicon Valley, or Santa Cruz, or Keller Williams Capitola, or whatever. It just had Keller Williams Realty. Now, as a technicality, that might be a way that the seller says, I'm not paying the commission that we're suing over. So anyway, make sure, this is a side note, in all the forms, in everything in the contracts, please put your complete name in here. Okay, let's continue on. So broker, beginning on a certain date. And a little subtlety here. It's not ending on a certain date. It just says for how many days later. So if you put 30, 60, 90, 120, 360, whatever it is. And I think the reason for that is that they want to be more user-friendly and not just put a date in, but to actually consciously put how many days this contract is good for. It kind of puts it out there that a buyer, if there's a date that's there, he can't, he can argue saying, hey, I didn't realize it was for a full year, but this really is transparent and puts it out there. So anyway, so that's the format that they have is they don't have the ending date, but they actually have how many days later it expires. Okay, any questions on that? Paragraph 1? Okay. Number 2 is that there's no previous buyer broker agreement on here. It's something similar to what we have as a listing agreement, that the buyer has not entered into a representation agreement with another broker. Except if there was a prior one, then it needs to be defined, just like our listing agreement has. Number 3, these are general, what you're looking for. I'm not looking for an address. I'm looking at location. Maybe it's Santa Clara County. Maybe it's Willow Glen. Maybe it's Live Oak. Maybe it's whatever it is. And you put down the general terms of what you're looking for. If you want to get more detailed and you want to put it just for a specific property, that's where you put paragraph B. If it's going to be a laundry list, you put it in paragraph C and you attach a property, you put a list together. But again, property to be acquired generally is the general wants and needs.
Hey, Mike.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you may have said this, I had just walked in, but where under paragraph 3A, location, if you check counties, do you still need to put a specific location? Like
Not a
say,
specific,
okay.
but I would put Santa Cruz County, I would put Santa Clara County, I would put, San Mateo, Monterey. I would put it in generalities.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike,
Yeah.
this is a buyer broker agreement kind of change. Or is this a mandatory form for all transactions now?
No, it is not mandatory. None of these forms are mandatory. It is. I think it'll become standard practice at some point in time, but it is not mandatory. And actually, there was a lot of pushback from a lot of brokers about having this, and and making things more, I'm gonna say more genteel. So you'll see some things in here, for example, we'll get into in a few minutes later, that this contract can be canceled by the buyer or by the agent. And it could be canceled depending on immediately or traditionally 30 days. So there was a lot of pushback on the buyer broker agreement, and the fight on the forms committee was, we need to make this really tight or we need to make this really loose. There was both basically two sides to this, to forming this contract and where people stood. So I'm telling you that this is not mandatory for our office. It's not mandatory for any company. But I do think, Olga, looking in the future, this will become standard practice at some point in time.
Oh boy. Okay, thanks.
I actually think as we get into some of the companies putting down compensation of $1, I think a lot of people will be moving towards this. And I don't see anything wrong with it. I think the sooner we get using it, I think the better will be for when this does happen. And I could see it happening at some point where sellers say, well, it's, the offer of compensation is going to be $1. I hope it takes a while, but I wouldn't be surprised that it is thing. We're not going to be doing that right now. We're not going to be the lone wolf in here, but I think it is important that we learn this buyer broker agreement. We know the supporting forms to it, and then at some point it'll become more comfortable for us to use. That's my opinion.
I have a
Okay.
question. Can I ask a question about that? It might be a tiny bit off topic. Because
No
I
problem.
remember when you were talking about the commissions getting pushed to buyers paying rather than sellers. Is that going to be an expense that just comes out of escrow, or something that the buyers
I have
are going to have to come up with up front? Any thoughts on
no
that?
idea.
Okay.
My thought is that in the sale of a property, the people that have the money generally are the sellers. I'm not saying anything that's earth shattering on that. And now we have to deal with it. I don't have an answer. I don't know how it's going to happen, but maybe we deal with the seller, although they don't want to pay for it, maybe they pay for it and the buyer incorporate some of that in the purchase price. And then we just have to hope that it appraises at the new purchase price. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but we have to be ready for it. And the first step is dealing with getting the mindset that buyers should be signing a legal document like we have our sellers do. Okay. Clearly it's going to be tougher. The buyer, not all buyers have a ton of money sitting around. Usually they're using that for their down payment. So we have to come up with other alternatives that we can get compensated. Again, should the seller not want to pay commission to a buyer's agent? So anyway, and just knowing what to do or thinking about it is going to be a lot better than just being caught empty-handed on this. So let's get into the different types of compensation of broker. Again, it's negotiable, and the first thing is buyer agrees to pay a broker as follows: blank % of the acquisition price, or number 2 is a dollar amount, or number 3 is a compensation schedule that's attached. So that's the first thing, is the buyer agrees to pay to the broker. Now there's different ways of doing this. Okay. So the first way is that broker involvement, which is non-exclusive representation. So it says that only if the broker was involved in the property. And it means not just showing the property, but broker submitted an offer. And that the buyer was introduced by us. What it clearly says is that you just can't send a list to the buyer, and that covers you as an agent to get compensated. This is the non-exclusive representation. Okay. Now, that's the default on here. And there was argument about that too. A lot of people that wanted to make it kind of easy on the buyer. So you'll see a lot of things, and I think that it was kind of soft, a soft sell. And that's what the default on this, by getting the buyer to sign, is just saying, hey, you agree, we're going to get paid based on us being your guy. Now, you can check the box in number 2, where it's exclusive representation. So the buyer's going to be compensated with or without the broker involvement. Okay, so that's number 2. And there's a big difference between number 1 and number 2. The default is number 1. So anyway, so that's what's there. And then you have C, which is the cancellation of the buyer representation agreement. So if it's B1, it can immediately be canceled. So a buyer can send notice that I canceled the agreement. Or you check the box with how many days after the agreement, after receipt. B2 is a little bit different, and that is 30 days notice. Okay, so if it's a loosey-goosey, non-exclusive representation, it'd be canceled at any time. If it's the exclusive representation, it's a 30-day notice. Okay. If there is you could cancel with the 30-day notice. You could make it a little more stringent and check paragraph C2, and that is the cancellation can't take credit, can't take effect unless both parties agree to it. So there's different ways to make this contract tighter. And it's the election of options here. But if you just leave it the way it is, it's just not exclusive representation that could be canceled upon receipt.
Mike, does that
Yep.
mean that a buyer could have 10 of these out?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so basically,
Non-exclusive.
so there's no risk to the
Not-
buyer signing it, because they could, it's just, all it's saying is that if I find you a house, I get paid.
That's right. That's
Okay.
right. And that was the theory, Renee, why this passed the way it was. It was like, well, this is a no-brainer. It's easy. It helps the agents be able to get this signature. Other people took the other approach, saying, well, this means nothing. So let's talk about getting paid. Now, if the buyer's committed to paying the agent X amount of money, but if the seller is paying it, or the seller's agent is paying it, the buyer's not obligated to pay that money. They could be obligated to pay the difference from what they get paid versus the agreed amount, but all the money collected by the buyer's agent from other sources of the buyer, besides the buyer, count towards the obligation. So that takes care of that, paragraph D. Paragraph D3, this default, you could put the commission on the purchase agreement. Because now, up until today, I would tell you that you couldn't put commission down in the purchase agreement because it was dealing with who was paying us, which was the seller's agent. And there was MLS rules to that. This is saying that the seller is paying the commission and the seller, having the seller commit to paying the commission on the contract is totally legal and ethical. Did you guys get the difference between what we have, the rules today, which we can't put the offer of compensation on the contract because it's dealing with the seller's agent? And there's rules on the MLS about that. This is a different mindset, guys. This is the seller paying the buyer's agent. And it's totally legal to put it on the contract. I want to spend a second on this. I know we're running late, but I want you guys to understand the difference between the seller paying commission versus the seller's agent, which we have as of today, paying the commission. Are we good on that?
Where do we put seller pays me as I am a buyer agent, seller pays me commission on the RPA?
Well, first of all, let's take a step back. You don't have to do anything if the offer of compensation on the MLS shows what you're being paid. This is really strictly for anticipating in the future that that $1 commission is going to be paid by the seller to the agent, to the buyer's agent. You don't need to do any of this worrying about getting paid if the offer of compensation on the MLS shows our 2.5% or 3%. We don't have to worry about getting money from the seller because we're getting it on the MLS. I'm anticipating when there's a $500 to the buyer's agent or $1 to the buyer's agent, how do we continue to collect our 2.5%? So the first question is, you may not have to worry about this. And I'm hoping that 99 times out of 100, you won't have to worry about it. Again, this is only where we are dealing with not being protected under the MLS for our offer of compensation. If we're not being protected for our offer of compensation and we want to get the seller to put it, and we use this as the default that we're authorized to put it on the contract, other terms and conditions would be a great place to put down. Seller shall pay, Keller Williams Santa Cruz 2.5% of the purchase price. Okay. So again, I'm hoping this is premature, that we're talking about having to be compensated through our non-traditional way. But who knows? This might be happening 5 years down the road, 3 years down the road, or 1 month down the road. I don't know, but you better be prepared. And being that this is kind of a lukewarm binding contract, it's basically getting the buyer to just sign this the way it is saying that we're going to work with each other, but it's not exclusive. And you're not obligated unless you and I work together. And then you're going to be paying us this. And all this money that you owe us will be zero if the seller pays us that amount in the sales price. So anyway, so let's go on from that. It's just we just got to kind of be prepared, have our head on the swivel, and have our eyes open as to what this industry might look like down the road.
Mike, I have one
different
quick
numbers.
question. Are we going
Sure.
to be able, would we be able to put, that the seller to credit buyer's agent 3%?
Seller to credit how? What do you mean?
In escrow?
It'd be an expense. Just say seller to pay.
Okay, so, okay, but seller to pay,
It's probably one and the same. You know, I don't know what the difference would be. Seller to credit. We're not part of the escrow, so I would just simply make it less complicated. Seller to pay buyer's agent.
okay, so that could be a part of the negotiation of the contract now that we have become part of,
I hope not.
I know, but if it does,
Frankly, Renee, I look at it more of a negotiation between the buyer and us instead of the seller and us. We'll see. Okay. I think that's about it right now that I want to cover in this one form. Just be aware that it's a different mindset than what we've had up until today. And this is just a different way as a buyer's agent, what to expect in terms of compensation from where we're getting it from. That's all. And I don't see it changing very quickly, but I do see it at some point in my life, a change. Okay, I'm gonna move on here. Again, they changed it. They're reflecting some of the things that are in the other agreements, which is now we don't need a representative capacity if it's a state or a corporation and all that. Okay, that's now here's the second form that was it was addressed in the buyer broker agreement. It says please see SPBB, and this would be a form that goes with that we would want to include in the sale of the property when we have a property that is dealing with the purchase agreement, and that's the SPBB, and it's a seller payment to buyer broker when we do have this. And just be aware that this might, this might become a normal form that we use when the seller is paying us commission. Now, again, we don't use this at all if we have compensation from the seller's agent. So if the MLS has that 2.5%, 3%, there's no need to collect the money from the seller. So this is, just identifies what the amount's going to be, and talks about it. It's kind of like a CBC only with the seller. Okay. This form here is that we, because it is ethically right and a fiduciary, we are supposed to tell our buyers what we're making. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that I don't think you need to do this form. Just give our client the MLS printout that has our commission on there. That satisfies the requirement of disclosure to our buyer what we get compensated, because the MLS printout has what the buyer's agent is getting. So I can tell you right now, I am not filling this out. I am going to give my buyer the MLS printout of the listing. And does it say it here? That it's okay. Not here, but it's in another form where we talk about it. You could use this form if you want, and it talks about what the, the properties that you showed and what the compensation offered. I'm telling you, I'm gonna take the lazy way out and I'm gonna give them just the MLS printout. But here's a form to help do that. And this is the cancellation of the buyer representation. Remember, we talked earlier that the buyer has the right to cancel. We have the right to cancel if it's a non-exclusive agreement. But if it is an exclusive agreement, it's 30 days. So here's the cancellation form.
Mike, I have a quick question. If you're just gonna use the MLS, is there some sort of documentation that MLS printout submitted to buyer on XYZ date?
Probably be a good idea, but I'll be honest with you, Elaine, I'm not gonna do it.
Okay.
Mike, on the on the client.
Hold on a
copy-
second, Terry. Terry, hold on one second. Elaine, back to you. I'm gonna give them the printout through email.
Okay, so
That's
then,
my-
so then
that's
you've
my-
got documentation of it.
Yeah, then you got documentation of it.
Okay,
And it's not illegal, it's just unethical and the fiduciary is that we have to disclose what we have. I mean, was that gonna get to a lawsuit? I don't know, it might, but just email them the copies of the printout, and you're
okay,
good.
and then probably copy your transaction coordinator,
Okay,
then everybody knows. Okay, thanks.
sounds good. All right, Terry, I'm sorry.
I have a comment, actually.
Hold on one second, May. Terry, you had a question?
Yeah, so Mike, I was thinking about this just this morning to upload like the client copy into my seller disclosures. But the client copy of the MLS does not have the compensation on it. And
That's
so that
right.
would mean that we would have to give the agent copy that
disagree.
might have confidential.
Are you sure, Terry?
I just did that this morning and I couldn't find it on the client copy.
It doesn't
Uh,
exist in the client copy.
I'm surprised, Terry.
I was going to say same thing, Mike. I have printouts that from my showings. Here is the client page. There is no compensation for the buyers, but there's cross property client thumbnail. There is nothing about compensation, but when I print out agent page printout, it has compensation. So anything with the client printout that I print out before my showings for my clients, they do not see my percentage, commission percentage.
I'm surprised by that, but it's gonna have to be changed. Because buyers going on the MLS see client compensation, buyer's agent's compensation. I don't understand why the printout wouldn't have that, but I'm okay with that. We just, then what you need to do is you need to give the agent MLS copy then. If it's not printed on the buyer's agent compensation, we need to do it on the MLS and send them whatever form we can.
Mike, so real quick here, it's Olga, just to reconfirm, normal transaction, a normal buyer, no broker agreement between the agent and the buyer, normal transaction. In that case, disclosing commission to the buyer, it's mandatory. So we always have to disclose, or only when
No matter what.
No matter what,
No
starting
matter
now, we
what,
always
whether
have
you
to
have-
disclose. Gotcha. Okay.
When you have a buyer broker agreement or not, you got to disclose the compensation that you're getting.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay. Notice of broker involved properties. This is where this is where you put it down between if you have a buyer broker agreement, you have the representation period, you have the dates on that. And you have the number 4 of all the properties that you showed. And this would be as you're coming up to the end of your buyer broker agreement, you put this down to kind of register. And it also puts a notice on the buyer that if the buyer intends to enter into a buyer broker agreement with another broker, buyer should give this form to the new broker. And I'm sorry for keeping you so much later than we started doing, but I wanted to at least just get you guys aware of the new forms for the buyer broker agreement and get comfortable with them. There's plenty of additional classes that Sierra is putting on right now. It's kind of on steroids that they're going over this. We'll be doing more classes in January regarding this as well. And again, I don't know if it's something that is going to be used by everyone and now or it's going to be 3 years from now. Could be 5 years from now. I don't know, but it's something that we should be familiar with and start getting comfortable using them. So any questions at all? I want to get you guys out. Bottom line is the RPA made some changes. You need to know about that starting tomorrow. The optional buyer broker agreements, it's optional as to when you want to do it. And there's also some new forms that are going to be implemented right away. So the first 45 minutes were forms that we were going to be using immediately. And the buyer broker agreement is something that we need to continue to get better equipped to be able to handle and explain it to our clients better. Other than that, guys, I'll stick around for a couple minutes for questions. Other than that, hey, have a safe holiday. Thank you for all the work that you do. And I just want to let you know I'm here for you. Thank you, guys.
Mike, I do have one question or one way that I'm thinking that we could maybe approach this.
Sure.
When and if it ever happens, which we all pray that it doesn't happen. But if we were to, when I talked about earlier, having the credit, seller to credit buyer, $3,000 or 30,000, whatever. And credits can usually go up to 6%. Lender.
Well, that's dealing with the buyer and the seller, and the credits really are limited only by the lender.
Okay, so couldn't we ask the seller, or couldn't we say seller to credit buyer X amount, and then put a demand in to escrow from the broker saying that we are part of the closing costs?
Okay, a commission would be part of the closing costs. I grant you that.
Right, and we put it in a demand because that's one of the things that the credits have to be used for closing costs. So if we were to put a demand into escrow and say that, or put our demand in escrow as a closing cost, I'm just saying when and if we ever get to this point.
Well,
one of the first.
I do think that the seller needs to be disclosed that we're getting compensated. I think that's the law. I'm not sure. I got to check that out. But you're
Okay.
trying to do a workaround that
I am, because like someone said, a lot of buyers don't have a pot to piss in. I mean, for them to have to come up with they would have to
Well,
add to their
all right,
loan.
so let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Getting paid directly from the seller, why not just do that directly instead of having to go through escrow and increase the purchase price for a credit when we can just get compensated from the seller? That would be easier, wouldn't it?
It would, but what I'm saying is that if we have a situation where a seller says, well, the seller agent, the listing agent says, hey, guess what? You don't have to compensate the buyer, or all you have to do is compensate me. And then you put in a request, the buyers, I'm just saying if worst case. Because I know what you're saying. I mean,
legally, as long as it's disclosed that it's closing costs and it's disclosed that we're getting paid, who cares? I just
Well,
think,
does
I
it-
just want to make this as easy as possible.
Right,
And the
and I'm
easiest
just
would be
thinking,
the seller writing a check. In escrow.
right, and the seller though, does the seller actually get to look at, again, do they actually get to look at the closing statement of the buyer? When they ask for a $3,000 credit or a $10,000 credit or whatever, does the seller have the right to see where that credit is going?
Well, I think now we're getting in the stage of we're secret profit, which might be a problem.
Okay, I'm just trying to think outside the box.
And that's the whole thing about this DOJ is secret profit. So secret profit from the buyer, not to telling them, or secret profit from the seller, not telling them. I think it's one and the same. We never had a problem with the seller because they were always paying us the commission. Or they were paying their agent a commission who was then paying us. But I think, Renee, when everything gets said and done, the way this is going to turn out is that we're not going to be able to hide anything, and it's just going to be just the seller pay us, or if they're not going to pay us, then the buyer's going to, in a buyer broker agreement, buyer would be responsible to pay us.
Well, that
I don't
kind of
know.
leaves out people, that again, we're kind of hurting the people with low down payments is my concern, unless there's a way to build it into the loan.
There's a way to build it in the sales price.
Okay, how? Now, how am I going to get compensated from the buyer, from this? How am I going to get compensated if I'm representing a buyer? How do I get compensated by building it into the sales price?
Well, what you could do is you could the first thing is you just have the seller pay. It's net to them, right? Sales price is $950. No, okay. How is the seller going to pay? Seller pays, buyer pays through a credit. It would have to be disclosed. $950 is the sales price. Well, let's make it $970, and the seller pays us 20 grand, and it's in $950. It was going to be $950. Now it's $970. The only
Which
problem you have
means-
is that you got
Yeah.
to get it appraised. That's all. But
And we
that's
have
the
to
way
get
you
it
do it.
appraised.
It's-
And once
You
again,
have, you have to build it in the sales price.
okay,
But
If
you're
the
still
buyer's not gonna
back at
pay.
square one, because then if the seller's paying, it has to be disclosed, and if it's a seller's closing, or if it's going towards closing
So-
costs.
There's no problem of disclosing that we're getting paid if you're just increasing the price and the seller's paying the commission.
Can
We're
I
gonna
say-
work it out, guys. We'll
Yeah.
work it out.
Gonna
Can
be
I say
fun.
something about that? So if we are going to get paid by buyer, I think that will erosion their down payment and closing cost situation, because they will be immediately thinking about the cash, they have it in their hand. If when we are getting paid from seller, as happens right now, our payment actually coming from loan, like 30 years loan. Isn't that like that?
No, I mean, the seller is paying us indirectly. It's really, right now, he's paying the seller's agent who's sharing with us. The mindset's gonna be the seller's gonna be paying us and paying the seller's agent. And it's just, we need to see what, not every buyer doesn't have money, but majority of the people that have the money are the sellers. So we're gonna have to deal with it. And we'll see what happens with us as, again, whether it happens a year from now, 5 years from now, 6 months from now, we're gonna be dealing with it, and we're gonna be sharing, we're gonna be masterminding what we need to do. So first step is putting it on paper, which is now being done. Next step is how to effectively use it. Right now, it's the important thing is get familiar with what is on paper.
To
So,
brainstorm for Renee, what she was asking how to structure that, I'm sure it could be done down the road in a way that says, here's the offer, and then under special terms, 20K, 10K out of the sales price amount
Yeah,
to go
there'll be-
towards compensating.
and-
That's not a big deal.
And in the forms that we just talked about, we have the right from the buyer by default to ask for our fee in the purchase agreement. So it's gonna be maybe a little wild west, but we'll see.
Yeah, I'm just
Anyway,
surprised.
with that, guys,
I'm just surprised, Mike, just to reconfirm that I heard you correctly, that any transaction, regardless of which forms are used, we are disclosing our compensation to the buyer, at least in the form of the MLS printout. Okay.
that's what
It
is
was on the
being
CD
told.
before, so.
Honestly,
Of ethics and fiduciary duty to the buyer. That's why we need full disclosure. This is part of the DOJ stuff. Just make sure that you show them the MLS that has the compensation on there.
Yeah.
And
we put into the disclosure.
that'll satisfy our obligation.
Yep.
Okay, all right, guys, I gotta run. I appreciate it. Happy holidays. We'll do
Thanks,
this
Mike.
again.
Thanks,
Okay,
Mike.
bye-bye.